Mike Butcher, editor-at-large with TechCrunch, and we're here at Tech Open Air Berlin, interviewing a few people, and we have Idan from Samsung, Brady from Highway 1, and Micah from NYU. Great to see you guys. We've got quite a lot of hardware here this year. I noticed there's got a little hardware alley over there. Highway 1 obviously is very much about hardware. I was chatting to a VC the other day who said as much as they love what's going on in the hardware space, they're still a little bit concerned about trying to get into it because it's very difficult actually once you really get into the detail of it. What do you think is holding some people back, and some entrepreneurs and some investors?
I think there's two issues. One is just the risk of doing hardware. It's hard to execute. There are companies that have lost years to trying to get a product manufactured. And then second, it's more expensive. Even if you are doing it right, there's still a lot of capital outlays. Now, luckily, this is where crowdfunding has come in, and so VCs can invest money. It goes into the product, the technology, and the company, but then the crowdfunding can be used for that first batch or several batches of inventory. And then you have companies like PCH, which is part of Highway 1, and other incubator programs like Bolt and Accelerator that help teach these companies how to do hardware to de-risk it.
But Samsung is doing a lot of hardware, obviously.
That's true.
What do you think about it?
So we built Boxee. We joined Samsung because we sold Boxee to Samsung, but we built Boxee in 2007. We started a company. Back then, it was impossible to raise money for hardware. Actually, we had to kind of pivot into software in order to raise money and then go back into hardware. And I think that one of the things that for VCs, mostly they don't want to put their cash into inventory, and that's exactly where crowdfunding is a lot of help. But the one thing that I still, whenever I see startups that are doing hardware, I still fail to see is how are they going to tackle the fact that selling hardware, they don't think about once they go into retail, the cuts that they're going to take, once they need to really scale up sales. Actually, only selling hardware is not, you can't make enough money out of that. You really need to have a model where you can have either a service or subscription or some kind of add-ons on top of it that will generate revenue. If you think about it, even something like Nest, which obviously is an unbelievable company and was sold for $3 billion, but at the end of the day, you build a new house, you buy 4 nests, you put them in there for $250, but then you don't touch it again for 20 years. Who needs another thermostat, right? So there has to be some kind of a service component around it.
What are your thoughts about it at the moment?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think software and hardware have to go together, and I think that what's been exciting here is that you have some entrepreneurs who are thinking about the end-to-end user experience. So it's not just about the device, it's not just about the plastic, but it's really about the kind of fundamental process of how a customer is going to engage with that hardware and what it's going to do. And I think that one of the reasons why you're starting to see a lot more innovation in the hardware space is because it's ripe for disruption, and that there are notions around kind of beauty and design that haven't been thought through, and I think that the thermostat example is spot on. But I think that, in our kind of normal activities, you see a lot of opportunities for disruption, whether it's home automation or video or enterprise. You can start to look at kind of hardware as a new lens for thinking through software and kind of the user experience.
We're also seeing a lot of actual sort of manufacturing process come closer to where the ideas are coming from. I know the editor of Wired famously left to go and do robotics, and I think in Mexico and in the US. We've seen a lot of manufacturing come closer over back to the US, like for instance Apple, doing quite a lot of that sort of thing. Is there a limit to that? How is that going to change the world of startups, do you think?
Well, I think that the problem eventually will always remain the fact that, for instance, doing assembly in the US might make sense, but a lot of the components aren't actually manufactured in the US. And even when you do move part of the manufacturing to the US, the cost of labor is still high. So it's really maybe someone like Apple that can somehow cover that cost on a very high price point and a very high margins can cover that. For a lot of these startups, sadly, they will have to go and manufacture in China. I think that Brady can probably talk more about that.
Yeah, robots cost the same wherever they are. So eventually, as more products are made with in automated fashion. However, most startups can't afford robots. It's not until you get to Apple scale that you can do that. So startups rely a lot on humans. And what I really think it comes down to is, where do you want your supply chain to be stretched? Do you want it to all be located in Shenzhen and then you ship overseas to your customers, or maybe some sub-assemblies to then get assembled? Or do you want to have your LEDs stretched across the ocean? And if you run out of LEDs, resistors, or some other key component, suddenly you're waiting months. And that's why I think companies are still going to China.
Yeah, yeah. What are some of the things that are exciting you at the moment in the world of tech? Wearables are pretty hot right now. I'm trying to quantify myself. Not having much of effect, unfortunately. What things? I mean, it's been so interesting to see glass kind of had this sort of hype and to some extent a bit of a boom, kind of perhaps slightly manufactured, and now not being quite as sexy as it once was. Now, what do you think about that?
I think that the one thing we haven't been seeing from wearables specifically is enough reactive type of interactions. So right now we're all quantifying ourselves, but there's no actual, that information is not coming back to us. I don't have the device that I can wear or use and it will tell me, you better take it slow today because you might be sick this weekend if you don't, or you better take a couple of these vitamins, or maybe you should see the doctor because we think that something's going to be wrong with you. Actually, we were talking earlier about a startup that is doing something that would be able to affect you that way. But I think that as we'll see more, like all this premise of what wearables can be will come to fruition once really there's some kind of an action that you can take on that data. And today the data is just floating out there. Not to talk about the complexity of actually where is the data and who's holding it and who's managing it and how is it all being merged together.
And also, so many of the wearables are not that good looking, are they?
Well, that's what I was going to say, is design, I think, is becoming a new trend, where more and more, and you see this with a lot of Yves Bahar's work, like it is his design touch that gets companies noticed, gets products noticed, and so more and more I think we'll have design-led hardware companies. Now the product he was talking about is called CUE, and it's an at-home medical diagnostic kit that if you take a swab, you can find out if you have the flu, what your vitamin D levels are, and it reports on the iPhone. Eventually, they hope to get prescriptions through that. And they came through Highway 1 last fall.
Amazing.
We see kind of three big buckets of interest. So the first is around health and wellness, and I think the point around reactive technology that ultimately leads people to live healthier, more productive lives is essential. We work with a company called Smart Vision Labs. They won $1 million from Verizon as part of their Powerful Answers competition. They have a really interesting diagnostic for refractive eyeglasses. The second area is around kind of cybersecurity and deep learning and artificial intelligence. I think cybersecurity, and you talk about connected devices, the last thing you want is someone hacking into your smart contact lenses or what have you. And then the third is really around innovation around cities and urban systems. So we're here in Berlin. We see just a tremendous amount of white space where big data meets city infrastructure, and there's a massive opportunity to kind of reinvent the way that we think about energy and buildings and water and waste and all the associated systems that come along with legacy infrastructure.
The quantified city, as it were, almost, I suppose. Speaking about Berlin, what sort of impressions have you had so far, both of the event and what you know of the tech scene here? Any thoughts?
I love Berlin. I especially love it in the summer.
Fantastic.
I first came here years ago for the Web2 Expo Berlin and got to know the startup scene then.
Yeah.
And I was most recently just here in, I think it was February, for ThingsCon. And the startup scene is great here.
Yeah. And just tell us briefly what you've been talking about while you've been here at the event.
I was doing two things. One, I was in the morning I was talking about how to build a company outside of the US but then make the move into the US. So when we started Boxee, we started in Israel, but later moved to New York, and that was a big part of the success. I think that a lot of the companies that are being started in Europe, it might be the right place for them to start, but eventually in order to mature they need to make the move into their actual market.
I've seen a lot of Israeli startups move to New York, and New York's actually almost been basically regenerated to some extent by a lot of European startups moving into New York. Is that something you've noticed?
Yeah, absolutely. We're actually hosting 4 companies from Germany as part of the German Silicon Valley Accelerator. It's the first time we're doing a program outside of San Francisco. So I think, New York is really, in many ways, it's come a long way in the last, 5 or 10 years. And the diversity of different verticals that you see, it's not just enterprise software or digital media, but it is connected devices, it is ed tech, it's food tech. And so there's a real diversity of industry sector, and I think those kind of creative collisions make it a place that that companies from around the world want to be.
It's something that we've seen in London as well, because there's a lot of, say, fashion and music and sort of vertical industries in London where people can sort of attack with the startup mentality. Finally, this is a very broad range event around design and culture and art and robotics. There's some drones flying around as well. Any thoughts about what you think about, everyone always asks this question, but anything that's exciting about something you can see coming along in the near future in technology, whether it be drones or whatever? What do you think?
We were talking about it earlier, and I think that it might be a little bit of a cliche, but drones are really interesting. But more than that, there's one specific company that I find very interesting, which is DJI, which makes the DJI Phantom, that a lot of people have started using.
And that's a what? What is it?
It's a drone that comes actually now already has a camera built into it, and the camera can be controlled from your phone. What's interesting is that it's a Chinese company that manufactures. It's based out of China, and it's very nicely designed. You'd think it's an Apple product. If Apple would make a drone, it would probably look like that. And more than that, it's really easy to use relatively to anything out there before. It's easy to use. Even I've seen a 3-year-old control the drone and control the camera. And I think that once that technology kind of reaches really common consumers, that will become very interesting. And then China being able to be at the forefront of creating something like this, unlike not a US company, not a European company, but actually coming out of China with a high quality product, with a high price point, not a drive to the bottom. That makes it very interesting.
You guys are practically building the future at high level, aren't you?
That's the whole goal. That's why we're there. We haven't taken a drone company in yet, but we're always looking for new medical, like consumer medical devices is what I'm really bullish on.
Absolutely, yeah. Fascinating. What do you think?
So I'll be the contrarian, and I'll say that the flip side of that, and there's a very different sensibility here in Germany around privacy, around the notion of privacy. In this whole conference, I've seen one Google Glass. And if this were held in San Francisco, you'd have 1,000, or maybe not 1,000, but a number of them. And so I think the notion of privacy and security is evolving in many different ways, and it's not just about your home or your Facebook account, but it's really kind of along this continuum. So that's an area where I think there's a lot of opportunity.
Well, I totally agree, and I think there's going to be a nice sort of debate between, say, European thoughts about privacy and US ones for many years to come. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mike.